Hi, everybody. First of all, of course, thank you to Mark, without whom we would not be here. I so appreciate collaborating with him. And actually, Mark and I, as he said, have been collaborating on the Pandemic Protection Series. And to summarize it, we have designed the programs to provide psychological armor because the pandemic has been full of challenges like losses, stirring anxiety and depression has increased 4 times since the pandemic. We've also collaborated to provide ideas for how to make meaning during the pandemic. And so in today's talk, I will provide strategies for responding to the changes. Change can lead to growth. It's very challenging to do change and not get stuck, but it can lead to growth. And I hope to encourage you that you can grow even as you grapple, even as you struggle with change. And as I prepared today, I was reminded about how every change can have a gift for you. Now, you might find that hard to believe, but I hope to convince you with an illustration from my own life. So, however, in order to experience the growth, we can rediscover ourselves at deeper levels, and we can learn to make order out of chaos, even from the death of loved ones. And we're going to look at 3 categories, as Mark said. The very first, the uninvited change, which is the most challenging. Certainly, the pandemic has been full of uninvited change. The second category is a change that we invite, but it's not welcome. We wish we didn't have to. And the third is the one that can make you smile. It's a change that you initiate, a fully chosen change. So as some of you know, I welcome interaction. If you have a question, a comment, if something isn't clear, Mark will help you get my attention. Right, Mark?
Yes, you can post it in the chat, and I'll stop Eileen and tell her that there's a message, there's a question. You can also, if I'm going to mute everyone except Eileen, of course. So if you want to just speak up, be sure and unmute yourself or type it in the chat. I'll tell Eileen there's a question, and then please be sure to unmute yourself to ask the question, to interact with Eileen. So best way is probably the chat. Just type the question into the chat, and I will tell Eileen there's a question.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So I'm reading you 2 paragraphs of what I wrote about my father's death. That in 1989, it was the first death of someone I loved. So here is my experience, which I hope will illustrate to you that even in the most enormous, saddest change, there can be growth and gifts. So this is only 2 paragraphs. When my dad died suddenly on August 19th, 1989, grief tore away the cobwebs and clutter from my eyes and my heart. Soon after Dad fell over that Saturday morning, I began to see anew. Every aspect of my life seemed to glow with vividness. I saw clearly what and whom I valued, as well as ways and people with whom I was wasting time and energy. In the months that followed, I reorganized my life, and rearranged my priorities. I socialized less, reflected more. I fell in love with nature, discovered a deeper spirituality. I allowed some friendships to fade and others to be rejuvenated. So that's a lot, isn't it? And I'm not denying that there were times of disorientation and struggle. And I remember vividly once sitting on a dock saying, I'm a fatherless child, I'm a fatherless child. It was a huge adjustment, but then gradually amazing amount of gifts were revealed in the change. So if you are interested in growth from the death of a loved one, here is a straightforward way to look for it. I heard this in a homily at a church, at a funeral mass, where a priest said, if you loved this person, take what you loved and express it in your life. So death, to me, the most challenging of changes, has that potential for growth and gifts. So it depends, though, how you approach it. If you approach change with the 3 AAAs, I call it, aware that it's happening, accept it, and adapt. Or if you approach it with the 3 R's, refuse to even notice it, resist it, and resent it, you will stay stuck and bitter. So before I go further, I want to invite you, I've done this a few times, I'm going to be silent for 1 minute and invite you to go into your inner self, as one writer calls it, the classroom of silence, because you can learn a lot in there. A lot of your answers are within. So for this exercise, I'd like you to call to mind a change that you encountered, maybe during the pandemic or not, and ask yourself, did you approach it with the 3 A's, the healthy way, aware, accept, adapt, or the 3 R's, refuse, resist, resent, or maybe you used both, maybe both of them were in your journey there. So I'm going to be quiet now. This is not for you to share with us. This is to expand your self-awareness about how you approach change. So I'm going to be quiet. I ask you to go within, try to stay focused on the topic, and I'll return in 60 seconds. Thank you. Okay, let's come back together. And now we're going to look at ideas that will help you embrace the AAA approach to change so that you can grow from it and find its gifts. So I have 7 ideas here for you. The first would be to resolve to stay awake and aware. So many people kind of drift through life or sleepwalk through life even, but I'm encouraging you to stay mindful, to be very aware. And awareness is the basis of all change. And then the second idea is to examine your attitude towards change. Your attitude shapes the way you'll experience it. If you see change primarily as, oh dear, it's going to be a struggle, and you overfocus on the loss, then it will be less of an opportunity for growth. The third idea is one of the 3 A's, accept that change is real. You don't have to like it, but you must accept it. As my favorite writer, M. Scott Peck in The Road Less Traveled says, mental health means being dedicated to reality at all costs. Now, when the reality is heavy and challenging, like the pandemic, it's tempting to practice avoidance or denial. But we want to do it the growthful way, so we want to accept what is real. And when you say yes I accept it, the energy shifts, and any resentment you might have is reduced. Now, I want to pause here and give an example of the second category of change, which is it's invited but unwelcome. And I'm going to use my own experience again, but it's much briefer than what I shared about my dad. Here's what happened. I was resenting the fact that I needed 33 radiation treatments in 2002 for breast cancer. So I still recall vividly. Now that would be a change that I invited. Hey, I want to be cured, right? But it was extremely unwelcome. So I fell into resenting it. And one day I was sitting on my couch and it was like a revelation. Eileen, why are you resenting? This is going to save you. And so in that moment, I said, yes, I accept that I'm going to do this at 33 days and stop complaining. When I said yes, I could feel the energy shift, just as I shared earlier. So saying yes is so important, even when we don't like it. If it's happening, we need to affirm that it is happening. Okay, let me see where I am. At the fourth idea for embracing change through the AAA method. And that would be to check out with yourself your thoughts. Some of you know that's one of my favorite topics, the power grid of your thoughts, 60,000 a day. So you want to check in, especially during change and turmoil. Are they primarily positive self-talk? Or are they lots of negative self-talk that you must disarm if you want to support yourself through the changes? Okay, then we're on number 5 idea. As we anticipate change or during the change, I want to encourage you to do what we just did. Go into your inner self and spend some quiet time. That renews your mind. And it's a way to discover unique, undiscovered dimensions of yourself that may emerge when you go within quietly. I would urge you to do that for a spell every day, especially during a time of change and transition. Your answers are, many of them are there through your, what I call your inner voice, your intuition. You can have guidance from going within. And the 6th is talk about it. If you're struggling with a change, be sure to talk about it with a trusted friend. Talking can bring clarity to what you're dealing with. Sometimes it just feels overwhelming and confusing, but when we talk, it gets clearer. And you know, this one hits upon 2 habits that I encourage, which is talk, tell your story, and create and support friendships, because friendships are priceless. I don't need to say more about that right now. I mentioned some of these things in other talks, and as I was realizing, well, you're repeating yourself, Eileen. Well, guess what? Some of these principles of healthy living apply to lots of situations. So I hope you'll be patient when you hear me repeat myself. Okay, let's see, we're on number 7, and that is your imagination. Your imagination is a powerful tool that I think we underuse, and it's a power tool so that you can envision. We're the only species that can see pictures in our mind, I've read. This is an incredible gift to see pictures in your mind, and you can envision a life that you yearn for, a life that passes beyond your current reality. And of course, this is especially relevant for freely chosen change, although it could apply to any change. And I've always been intrigued by a quote from Einstein, who said, imagination is more important than knowledge. That shocked me because he was so educated, right? But he recognized imagination is powerful. So those are the 7 ideas if you want to embrace change through the AAA method. Aware, accept, and adapt. Now, are there any questions about any of that before I shift to another topic, another part of this topic? Okay, then before I shift, I'm going to read you a little reading from the Daily Word. Do any of you read the Daily Word? It's a little booklet that is full of psychological and spiritual insights. It's not any denomination, but I love it because of the 2, psych and spiritual, interwoven. And this pertains to our journey very much. So I invite you to close your eyes and let me read this to you. Okay? I embrace change as it allows me to become all I am meant to be. As I move through transitions and evolve in understanding, I release the past and welcome the fullness of the glorious present in whatever form it takes. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water here. Now we're going to look at 4 roadblocks on the path to healthy change. And these are the roadblocks that if we don't remove them could keep us stuck in the 3 R's. So the first one, the major one that applies to so many situations is the roadblock. It's a 4-letter word that starts with F, fear. Fear is so powerful to discourage us and keep us from growing. John Lewis, the Senator John Lewis, who died recently, he was a civil rights icon. He was fond of saying, your fear is an imaginary prison. Fear will put you in prison. Now, I'm talking about irrational fears. We do have a realistic fear these days with the pandemic. And so when we have a realistic fear, what are we called to do? Keep ourselves totally safe, get those vaccinations, wear the masks. But once we've done everything we can do, we need to let go and not keep thinking about the fear to keep us fearful. So these fears that I'm talking about are, well, the most common ones are the fear of failure, fear of disapproval, fear of making a mistake. And I confess that fear of failure prevented me from coming onto Zoom for a couple of months. And I wasn't practicing what I preached. And I had to say, hey, Eileen, you got to do this. So what if you're not your best? Try it and do it. So it seems like there's in the human person, I've heard that our hard drive is actually fear-based because our ancestors needed fear to alert them to, say, the wild beasts that were coming out. They needed the fear. And you've all heard, of course, of the fight or flight syndrome. So, of course, we want to use the energy of fear to dismantle it. How do we dismantle our fear? We have to face it. We have to name it. We have to claim it, meaning talk back to it so that you can eradicate it. Or if it's still there, use courage, the definition of which is being afraid, but acting anyway. So I wanted to share this that I read many years ago about Mary Hemingway, one of the wives of Ernest Hemingway. She wrote that when she worked at Time magazine, her editor gave her 7 words that she said changed her life. And they're very relevant to our journey. And he told Mary, never make a decision out of fear. And I think that's a wonderful thing to keep in mind. 7 words. And I actually recall my first spiritual director, Sister Judith, said to me one day, 5 words that have helped me. Fear is not of God. So we've got to recognize the power of fear. It's like a plague. It's like cancer of the spirit. So let us remove that roadblock from our journey by grappling with it intentionally. And does anybody want to ask anything about fear or coping with it? Remember, it's really important to name your fear, because you cannot heal what you're not seeing. So when you name it, you can grapple with it much more so than if you just keep it vague. Okay, the second roadblock is good old NST, your thoughts, negative self-talk. If it's primarily negative, it's a roadblock to growing through the changes that we're all encountering, the inevitable changes. The third is attachment to your comfort zone. There's a, what would I call it? Like a principle in psychology that people are more attracted to the familiar than the unfamiliar. And even when the familiar is miserable, there seems to be more comfort with it. So when we're grappling with change, we want to take a look. Are we in a comfort zone anywhere that we need to move out of into new territory? And then the fourth roadblock would be an escapist lifestyle. And that would be a lifestyle in which one behavior is way out of balance. And the behavior could be fine by itself. It's just that when it's out of balance, you're avoiding something. I mean, such things as even exercise, television, work, reading, being busy all the time. So check yourself out for whether that's one of your issues that could be a roadblock in growing through change. Okay, I'm going to shift again. Any questions or comments so far? Okay. So now category 3 change. Oh, somebody wanted to talk?
We had to get our sound on here. But you're talking about facing fears. I sat down earlier last week, or at the end of the week rather, and got myself a little notepad marked Jean's fears. Write them down, identify what they are, and then you can work on it as you have time and as you can get into it. And if you list them, you can take care of it. But if you don't list them, it's up around going like this in your head.
Yes, Jean, that's really reinforces my message. Thank you.
Welcome.
Sorry, we're late. We forgot the time.
Oh, it's good to see you two. Familiar faces. Yes. So thank you. So you bought a notebook and you list your fears. So that you encounter them, and we're excellent. Did you hear me say that right now? Right before you got on? I was talking about that. You practiced.
Oh, okay.
I love the fact that you reinforced it. Yeah.
You're welcome. No fee.
Name, claim, and tame. And if you're still afraid, get your courage and act anyway. The definition of courage. Okay. So we are now going to look at the category 3 changes. The category 3, in case you missed it, are the changes that you freely choose. So they can be they can make you smile. So here's what I have in mind for that. I am going to give you homework for that, if you choose to accept it, of course. And I'd love it if, after I give some ideas here, if some of you might share a change you have freely chosen and how it worked out for you. But for now, here's what I suggest. If you have a little notebook like Jean, I think having notebooks for growth is a great idea, or a journal. I'd like you to ask yourself, is my life working the way I wish it would? And I'll repeat that. The pandemic is a great time to ask this question and to go within to see, learn yourself, get better acquainted with what you might want and need. And this is the time to actualize it. So, is your life working the way you wish it would? Now, if you're not sure, I have 5 questions you can ask yourself that might help you to clarify how you feel about your life right now. Because it isn't often that we actually intend to do that, that we sit down and say, hey, I'm going to review my life and reflect. Because wherever you are is not cast in stone. You can always become other. So the first question is, do you still believe any negative messages from your childhood about yourself? Yeah, it's sad to say many people still hold themselves back by believing something that a parent said, not realizing how destructive it was. And if, for example, one of the litanies I heard often when I had my practice was adults who heard in childhood, you'll never amount to anything, which is really sad, and which is a projection of the parent's self-image. So I mention that now because if we don't, excuse me, if we don't reflect on our childhood with our adult intelligence, we could believe things about ourselves that simply are not accurate. And that can be a heavy, heavy burden to carry. Okay, the second question is, back to the thoughts again. Are your usual 60,000 thoughts helping you or hurting you? It makes sense to check in with those thoughts again, since they affect everything, as you've heard me talk about before. I'll repeat these questions briefly after I do the 5. 3, are there habits you need to change to become your best self? And again, the pandemic does give us the gift of time. So remember what Aristotle said, we become what we habitually do. We might want to stop a habit or start a new one. And number 5, are you using your skills and talents in a satisfying way? Are you expressing your creativity? We all have creativity. It's one of our highest gifts. And when we express it, it brings us peace and a feeling of goodwill. And then finally, what do you love to do? And are you doing it? I want to give you an example of that from my practice. I saw one of the women I saw, well, this often happened, but she was especially desolate. And I won't go into why. You could imagine the human condition and the suffering. She was especially desolate. And one day I was inspired to say, because I had never asked a client this before, I don't think, what do you love to do? Is there anything you love to do? And she answered pretty quickly. She said, I used to love ballroom dancing. And so she changed by enrolling in a dancing class. She was so good, she went into tournaments. I don't know if they call them tournaments or contests, but she was winning. She was a fabulous dancer. So you can imagine how her bleakness faded and she began arriving with a smile. So this information is not theoretical, it's real based on lived experience. So shall I repeat those quickly just with a couple words, the 5? Are you attached to childhood messages that are hurting you? Are your usual thoughts supporting you or dragging you down? Are there habits you need to change to become your best self? Are you expressing your skills, your talents, and your creativity in satisfying ways? And then finally, what do you love to do? And are you doing it? So now we're entering a new phase of the pandemic, as Mark and I were talking earlier. There are vaccinations occurring. I sense a difference out there in the world, and yet we still have to be super careful because the numbers are still not what we want. So I'm hoping that with some of what you've heard today will encourage you to move through the changes as they come with the AAA method. I'm not sure Jean and Natalie heard that. If so, I'll repeat it. The healthy way to move through changes is the AAA method. Aware, the change is there, accept, adapt, meaning you'll probably be changing your behavior, adapt with new behavior. Or the R method keeps you stuck, where you want to deny the change and you don't grapple with it, you ignore it, and that leads to bitterness and stuckness. And the R's are refuse, I refuse to name it or see it, I resist it, I resent it. Refuse, resist, resent. Roadblocks to the healthy change. So my hope is that you will choose newness, which nourishes you. And I hope the 5 questions might help you to set your wheels in motion. And before I actually end, I'd like to know if anybody wants to share anything at all, maybe about a change they've made or a difficult anything about change. Anybody? Mimi.
Hi, Eileen.
Hi, Mimi.
As you were talking, I thought about probably one change that was really pretty a big unwelcome change in my life, and that was divorce. And when I was divorced, I remember thinking, I remember when I was first divorced, oh my goodness, I have to drive to Greensburg by myself, which is laughable now because I do it all the time. I think nothing of it. But at the time, and I was pretty young, but talking about, those changes that are gifts, it made me realize and make a decision that I would never let myself get to that point again, where I was afraid I felt uncomfortable driving from like Penn Hills to Greensburg. But it just goes, that was, it just brought that to mind that I had never realized that. But, it was an unwelcome change, but there was a gift in there.
Great example, Mimi. Thank you. So you gradually became aware of this fear and you decided, no, I don't want this. Is that right?
Right. I became aware of it pretty quickly, actually. And I'm not quite sure why. I guess because I changed jobs, or I got a teaching position in Greensburg, and I had to do that on a weekly basis. So it was either accept this job and deal with it, or but you create kind of unnecessary, unrealistic fears. I guess that's it.
Yes, exactly, Mimi. Well, this is a wonderful example of what we've been talking about. The gift is there in every change.
Right.
Sometimes it's hard to unearth it, but if you have that attitude of I'm aware, I want to really know what's going on. If you notice the fear, you grapple with it. It makes a big difference in life.
Mm-hmm.
We are faced with inevitable change. Why not educate ourselves and prepare ourselves and be a proactive approach to change? Thank you so much.
Sure.
I love that. I love that when an example from one of you kind of reinforces a point I've tried to make. Thank you, Mimi. Anyone else out there with a change or they want to share? Okay, well, I have a little more to share, and then maybe there'll be something else that comes up. Oh, I wanted to wind down with the words of a man who dealt with the second category of change. I'm going to repeat the three categories for Natalie and Jean, if you don't mind, because they're so faithful. They come to all the talks and always add something. Because I think you missed the three categories. The first category is the uninvited change. Nobody wants this change. I use the example of my dad dying suddenly in '89 and the gifts that came from that death after I struggled and cried about being a fatherless daughter. The second category is what Mimi described, that you invite the change, but it feels unwelcome for a while. And the third is what we're talking about recently, that change we choose through our freedom, because we know it will expand our life, make us smile. I'll share a change that I freely chose before I wind down. In 1992, I was living in Shadyside and I was divorced. And I began to realize Shadyside didn't work anymore for me. And I also became aware that I had a yearning for water. So I certainly couldn't afford to go to the ocean, but I kept thinking about the rivers. And I had a dear friend at the time, Ken, who drove me all around the city to look for a place on the water. 2 years of driving. It was fun too, of course, but it took 2 years. And then one day we drove across the Halton Bridge and I saw the building I moved into. I don't live in that building now, but I still live on the water with great gratitude. So I've been here, what is that, 92? I think it's 29 years. I've never lived in one place, even a fraction of that before. So I feel very grateful. It was scary, like letting go of what you know, letting go of your comfort zone, and walking into the unknown, because you sense it will expand you, it will be growthful. And that's wonderful about life, that we can always choose to embrace newness and to transcend our fears, as Mimi did about driving. Okay, anyone else before I share a little bit more? Okay. So many years ago, there was a saying that I heard a lot. It was called, people are like tea bags. They don't know how strong they are until they get in hot water. Natalie's laughing. Have you heard that, Natalie? You've heard it, Ming. I love it. Love it. So people are like tea bags. Sometimes they don't know their strength until they get in hot water. So what I'm going to read you briefly are the words of a man who didn't know how strong he was until he got in the hot water of cancer treatment, which is one of those changes we invite, but we don't like, the second category, but we know we need it. So anyway, this man, David McNally, he finished his treatment and he sees himself as a survivor. And this is what he declared. I love this, and it inspires me, and I hope it will inspire you. Okay? This is David speaking. Something inside me, remember, he's a survivor, the treatments are over. Something inside me was declaring, you are not here to mark time. Within each of us is a force, a spirit, waiting to burst forth, a desire to create, to boldly engage with life. Do not take your life for granted. Do not allow negativity to take away imagination and dreams. You may have 24 years to live, or 24 hours. We truly do not know. So let us not hold back. Let us live boldly. And that's what David said. I hope that inspires you. So that winds down my remarks. I wanted to mention a book that I intend to buy because of the title, but I better read a few reviews. But listen to this title. I Will Not Die an Unlived Life, Reclaiming Purpose and Passion by Donna Markova. Have any of you ever heard of that? Does it sound good? I'm going to read about it before I buy it, but it sure sounds like something that would have wonderful, inspiring messages. And so that's all. That concludes my remarks. Do I have any remarks coming in from any of you? No pressure, of course. Okay. Well, then did you want to speak, Natalie? There.
Yes, I lost the group pictures here. I'm still stuck on the fourth one about using your talents in a creative way. You know, I'm in my 70s. I know I'm sociable, but I have trouble identifying my talents because if I think about it, might be pride coming up, and I don't want to be prideful. Wow, that's something I'm going to have to look at.
Oh, Natalie, I'm glad you named it because I want to encourage you. It isn't pride to say, these are my God-given gifts. I mean, you're a child of God and you have gifts. And so to name them and use them isn't pride. It's becoming the best you can be. Are you with me, Natalie? Now,
Yes,
I know one of your
but it's
gifts.
still hard.
Okay, but that doesn't mean you don't do it. You know what I mean? That it's hard, but nothing worthwhile is easy. That's one of my favorite sayings. It's true. Nothing worthwhile is really easy. And I know a gift you have because I was in a room once where you were singing. Isn't that right? She has a
Yes.
beautiful voice. And maybe she can, when things get back to normal, sing to Jean, sing to your neighbors. You have gifts, Natalie. Look within, make a list like your husband does, a different kind of list, and express them.
Thank you.
Please do. Jean?
I think for many of us, I'm not talking about anyone here, but for many of us, that sort of thing where we don't want to, we're thinking, well, I'm being too prideful, etc. That runs back to our bringing up at home as children and what our parents told us about how to act, how to feel, how to see things. And I think as adults, we have to grow up and look at those admonishments or those suggestions and say, this is good or this no longer applies to me.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That was my first idea. You're reinforcing it about, are you still believing childhood messages that hurt you? And let them go. Thank you, both of you.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. That was my first thought when Natalie said that. I thought, oh, that just sounds like something a mother would say to a child. Or something.
Right.
And it goes back to the point that you made.
Yes. Well, it reminds me of something my dad used to say. Like I'd come home with a report card pretty full of A's, and he never mentioned them. But if I had a B, he would grill me. Like, what? And I'd say, Dad, you never affirm me. He said, I don't want you to get a big head. That's one of those old messages, right? We've got to cleanse them away and affirm each other. We all need affirmation and we're all deserving of it, I think. Okay, thanks, Meme. Anyone else before we say goodbye? Okay, well, it was delightful to be with you. And I want to say, if you have an idea for a talk, please communicate with Mark, right, Mark? You're okay with that? And we could plan a talk that meets your needs if you'd like. So
I'd like to follow
Yes.
up with one thing, Eileen.
Good.
God gave me a talent. There's a job I can do. And with this talent, I'll let God's love shine through. And I'll do my job well as best as I can. And my God and me will work hand in hand. Thank you, Eileen.
Oh, Natalie, she used her gifts right in front of us. You did it right now. You changed. And the words of that song.
Beautiful. Mhm.
Yes, thank you. I love that. And I love your boldness at singing for us. Right?
Thank you. In small groups we can.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Well, thank you all for coming. I love being with you. And I'll look forward
Okay.
to our next visit.
Bye-bye, hon.
Sign
Bye-bye.
language.
Elaine.
I'm gonna shut it off.
Thank you, Eileen.
Here, don't click off. Do
Thank
that.
you, Mark,
Okay.
for everything.
Thank you.